All right, so Genesis chapter 3 is where we're looking today. We're going to start right at the beginning of the third chapter. And the title for this Bible study is The Fall, Broken Shalom and Fractured Relationships. Now, first, I want to acknowledge that almost any Bible study on Genesis 3 is going to be inadequate, just as our brief exploration of the Trinity in creation last week was inevitably inadequate. But that doesn't mean that we don't begin to go for it. There's no possible way we can cover all of the implications of Genesis 3 or the allusions in Genesis 3. We could do an hour-long Bible study easily just on the Christology present in this chapter. Nevertheless, in our brief time today, I'd like to draw out some observations from the text that I hope may prove helpful in our long-term understanding and interaction with the topic at hand, particularly racial justice. Listen now to the word of the Lord, beginning the first verse of chapter 3 of Genesis. Now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, "Did God actually say to you, 'You shall not eat of any tree in the garden'?" And the woman said to the serpent, "We may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but God said, 'You shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die.' But the serpent said to the woman, 'You will not surely die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil.' So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. And she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. Then the eyes of both were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves loincloths." I'm going to pause there. I've got just two brief observations. Augustine said that pride is the beginning of all sin, the sense that we know better than God what is best for us or others or what is right. And whether or not that's actually the beginning of all sin, it absolutely is a significant problem for me, and I'm guessing for you. And when it comes to conversations, to hard conversations around topics such as race and justice and ethnicity and shalom, we can easily fall back into that same place, a sense that we know better than God what is best for us or others, or that we know what is right. Now, this Hebrew word here, knowing, between good and evil, there's a sense in the Hebrew of, it could be interpreted a couple different ways or translated a couple different ways. Absolutely, it's the way that we would think about knowing, understand, but it could be used in different ways too. So to know good and evil could be translated to be able to narrate good and evil, or to announce what is good and evil, alongside the to know or understand. And I think perhaps this has some implications for us as we think about kind of who gets to narrate the world and how we narrate the world. That this is part of the fall. Now, we are able to narrate for better or for worse. Continuing in verse 8, "And they heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And the man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden. But the Lord God called to the man and said to him, 'Where are you?' And he said, I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself.' He said, 'Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten of the tree of which I commanded you not to eat?' The man said, 'The woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me the fruit of the tree, and I ate.' And then the Lord God said to the woman, 'What is this that you have done?' And the woman said, the serpent deceived me, and I ate.' And so the Lord God said to the serpent, 'Because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock, and above all beasts of the field. On your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel.'" There's a lot there. So I'm going to make 5 quick observations this time. First, and this is probably obvious to any of us reading this or listening along, everybody goes in the defensive immediately. That's the first reaction, is to go in the defensive. There's blame shifting from the start, a twisting of words. Satan, when he gives them or tempts them to eat the fruit, is so close to speaking the truth, but he twists it just a bit. He twists it just a bit. And this is how sin often works, is we take something that is good, or Satan takes something that's good, twists it just a little bit, and before you know it, we're way out of bounds. One of my friends noticed this past week, that man, as we talked about last week, is given dominion. And the first thing he does is abdicates responsibility. The first thing he does is abdicates responsibility. He's complicit. And as this happens, he sits back and watches it happen without intervening. You're probably already picking up on how maybe that has implications for the way that we talk about and interact with race and racial justice. And then God intervenes. And here's what I want to pull out from this briefly. Sin has consequences and far-reaching implications, often significantly beyond the moment. You and I have experienced the implications and the consequences of the fall. And many of us, well, all of us, have experienced this in our own lives. We make what seems like a small and inconsequential bad choice back here, and it reverberates into the future, not just for us, but for others, for those around us. And yet at the same time, as there is now brokenness between creation, broken shalom, we talked about that a little bit last week, this sense that of wholeness, that wholeness is now broken. There's also a hint of future hope. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. There's a promise that down the road that this will be made right. Continuing in verse 16, to the woman he said, I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be contrary to your husband, but he shall rule over you. There's a lot that could be said here. Here's what I want to say, though, that now there's a disordered, broken relationship as a result of sin. This that's described here by God in verse 16 is a consequence of the fall. And as a result, enmity is now between people. The woman and her husband, their relationship is now fractured. People who are created for mutual love and service in the image of the triune God, who exists in loving the other. Well, that wholeness, that image is now fractured and broken. To Adam, God said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken. For you are dust, and to dust you shall return. Now, first of all, we know that work isn't bad. We know that work isn't bad because in chapter 2, before the fall, God actually gives Adam work as a gift. However, as a result of the fall, the good gift of work became twisted. And so now man's very relationship with the earth itself is broken and fractured and disordered. The world that creation was meant to take care of people, we were meant to take care of creation, and that is fractured as a result of sin. So as a result of the fall, the good gift of work has become twisted. And we see finally here in verse 19, that the consequence of sin is death. The man called his wife's name Eve because she was the mother of all living, and the Lord God made for Adam and for his wife garments of skin and clothed them. And then the Lord God said, "Behold, the man has become like one of us in knowing good and evil. Now lest he reach out his hand and also take of the tree of life and eat and live forever." Therefore, the Lord God sent him out of the Garden of Eden to work the ground from which he was taken. He drove out the man, and at the east of the Garden of Eden, he placed the cherubim and a flaming sword that turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life. Two closing observations. One, the shalom, the wholeness, the right relationship that existed between man and God, between man and woman, and between man and woman and the earth is all distorted and broken because of sin. Sin is like chocolate in a marble cake, right? If you've got a yellow cake that's a marble cake, you swirl the chocolate all the way through, and then when you cut a slice of cake, it's impossible to cut a slice of cake without getting some swirl of chocolate. I know because my oldest son does not like chocolate, and this has happened before. We're trying to get him a sliver of marble cake with no chocolate in it, and it's impossible. And that is how sin has worked. It's worked its way through all corners of human existence and relationship. And despite all of this, there is grace. We could go back and pull out grace after grace after grace. But here's just a few. God still names the man and his wife. He still provides covering for them. He still protects them. And I'm going to argue in the future that what God does here is discipline them to his purposes in the future. All right, that's it.